All right, folks, welcome to the last e-learning workshop for fall 16. Congratulations, you should get a door prize. My name is Pablo Yanez. I think I know most of you. I am an e-learning specialist at the Office for the Associate Provost for E-Learning, or APPLE, as we call ourselves. Today I'll be presenting with my colleague Adam Barger and Rob Rose, who we'll be introducing later. Today we're going to be talking about incorporating real-world projects into your courses. This is a subject near and dear to me. I'm a geologist. Some of my fondest memories are the transition in some of the early classes of going between theory, that is sort of traditional kind of book learning. In this case, a structure class that I took in my second year, where you got to talk about and look at books and read about all sorts of complicated geological structures. It was good. It was great. It was good to look at it. Eventually the faculty members sort of transitioned us into going to the field to seeing examples of this that were sort of nicely sanitized and idealized. And then you go to the practice and you go out, and this is a common reaction, I think, among my peers. You go out into the field, and what you run into is lots and lots of trees with very little exposure, and there's bugs biting you, and there's poison ivy, and the terrain is very tough, and less than 1% of the rock is actually visible. So in the practice portion of this, the real-world application of this, I think it became great. Because, first of all, it validated that we had learned useful things. It proved to us that not only that these things exist, but that we could figure them out, even in much more complicated systems than we had sort of been presented to that point. So this was my, these are some of my fondest memories of being an undergraduate, where we got to apply real-world, in real-world systems, what we had learned. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I thought I would put this up as I was planning the seminar. I ran across this. My wife showed it to me, and I thought, oh my God, this is just perfect for a workshop. So this is from a student that went to Northwestern, I think, and she wanted to go to the Cubs parade. And it was for a law class, apparently from a faculty member who was very hard about having students miss classes. And his reply to her is just absolutely fantastic, because on one hand, he's being kind of tongue-in-cheek about it, but it really demonstrates how motivated I think students can become by sort of saying, wait, what I'm learning actually applies to the real world, and I can use those tools in the real world. So I thought it was just a great example to just talk about as we started this workshop. So anybody care to define what they would think of as a real-world project?
Okay, well, I have been trying, it's also my first semester here, and the class is titled Cross-Cultural Perspectives. So I have prepared an assignment for them to do 3 times throughout the semester where they have to engage with someone of another culture and specifically Latin America, or Hispanics, Latin America and Spain, to supplement the textual and performative examples that we see in class, to have a real-life conversation with someone.
Okay, excellent. So it's a non-controlled system, basically, right? It's
so it's like putting them outside the scope of the classroom where I tell them what to do and how to read the text and how to respond.
And I almost feel like I'm cheating with like geology, because geology, real world, that is kind of what we do, right? But I remember having classes in sociology, in English, where we actually went and did these exercises that were really fantastic. Anybody else would talk about real world in a different way? Yes?
So I teach organic chemistry, and so we learn this whole bunch of different reactions and mechanisms. And at the end of each unit, I'll have them synthesize certain drug molecules. I say, hey, this is a certain drug that is against whatever, certain type of heart condition. How would you synthesize it using the tools that, and then they synthesize that drug or they come about ways. And since they're mostly pre-meds, they're usually really fascinated that they actually know how to make certain drug now. So.
Okay, yeah. So real world, and this came up in yesterday's discussion, doesn't necessarily mean that it extends outside of the university, but to some degree, it's that it's a real world application of something, right? It's not a very controlled synthetic data set, for instance. Dennis, anything? No? Okay. So with that, let me turn it over to Adam, and this is my colleague Adam Marder.
Hey, Pablo. Thank you all for coming. I enjoy being involved with these workshops because I often get to see new faces. Each workshop has some people coming. We appreciate your attendance and your time. My area of research is curriculum and educational technology, which a lot of times overlaps with the types of projects that faculty members are doing, and it also overlaps with a lot of what we're doing in the call curriculum. So this is a very timely topic. And the idea of how we come about these topics is really rooted in your feedback. So just if you don't know already, I'll tell you, we survey faculty each semester with a list of kind of emerging hot topics that we pick up from our own conversations with faculty members. And we suggest different topics to present an e-learning workshop on. And based on faculty members voting, we pick the top 3 and we present. And then our research includes going to the teaching and learning literature and seeing what's happening there in combination with what is happening here among you and your colleagues with what's already happening in the classroom. So that point of where the literature and the practice here when America kind of intersects is what we try to present. And so this kind of extends to a topic in literature known as authentic assessment. And just by show of hands, how many have heard that term before? Just a couple, okay. So authentic assessment does not mean that there are assessments that you might be doing that are necessarily inauthentic or bad. It's a style of assessment that is made to kind of mirror what's happening within your discipline in the real world. And so kind of outside of the classroom, how does your discipline exist outside of the classroom, and how does your discipline approach different problems? And if you can build that perspective into an assessment, it is termed an authentic assessment, because trying to mirror what's actually out there. And so one of the best definitions I found was actually just from Edutopia. I like this because it talks about it's not just tasks, projects, structures, and learning environments. So as you're designing, or maybe you're thinking right now in your head, okay, I want to have a real world project. Maybe the first step is thinking, why would I do that? And this might be an answer to start kind of mulling over in your head. It's a project and it's a structure for approaching your discipline that can exist outside in the real world. So we have some literature on authentic assessment in higher ed using e-learning tools and resources, and that'll be posted in this PowerPoint or in this Google Slides at the end, and you'll have access to it so you can read on your own time. As if you don't read enough during our articles, I found 2 more for you. And so that relates to our theme for the semester. We have a theme of universal design for learning. And one more time, by show of hands, how many have heard of this term? Just a couple. All right. So this is a great audience because you're all learning some new things here. Universal design for learning is a teaching and learning framework. It's a way of approaching the idea of education from a certain perspective. And it comes out of the universal design for architecture movement that we see all over campus. When a building is built with universal design in mind, it's accessible for all people, not just people who might have a disability. So, for example, the ramps that are now in a big pile outside of Millington, those were added after the building was built. But now our new buildings are built with accessible ramps and push-button doors, everything's built in. And those changes are good for all people who use that building, not just those who might need it. I use ramps all the time when I'm pushing a stroller, right? So if you take that idea of designing something from the ground up with all learners in mind, that's universal design for learning, because you all have learners of extreme variabilities in your classroom, lots of different folks in your classroom. So accepting that fact and designing your projects, assignments, and maybe even your whole course at some point with variability in mind means you're going to give multiple pathways to get through that course and to engage with the content. So the 3 tenets of UDL are multiple means of engagement, so how they interact with the content, maybe not just readings, but other types of ways to interact. Multiple means of representation, how you present the content, maybe not just lecture, but other things as well. And then multiple means of action and expression, which is what this workshop focuses on, the idea of expression being a type of assessment. How do learners express that they've learned something Is it one way, just like a summative paper, which is not bad, or is it multiple ways? And UDL would say design multiple ways. A real-world project is one of those ways to assess learning and to fall into this third category. So UDL has been part of our framework throughout this whole semester. If you're interested in it, there's some resources on this presentation, and then you can go back to our other workshops, the first of the semester, and check those out as well, because there's our other applications of UDL. So our goal for you today is to explore the why, the how, and the when of using real-world problems. And we're doing that through this idea of thinking about authentic assessment and then seeing what your colleagues are doing right now. So we have 3 case studies that we will look at. 2 of them, the folks could not be here in person, so we have them here digitally. And then Rob Rose will be our 3rd example towards the end. So I'm happy to share the first example. Right after these 3 models that we determined, all the examples we looked at fell into one of these categories. This one in the middle, the classroom to real world application, is probably what many of you do just naturally, like Dana was mentioning with the drug example. You're in your classroom, and so you're taking some application of the real world, and you're in your classroom looking at it and talking about it, and you're extending it beyond just the classroom experience. This happens a lot with projects and papers and blogs and websites and just any kind of connection of your content to life outside the classroom. These other 2 models we find happens less often, but there's some really great things that are happening that we're going to show you today. The first one is taking data or a problem that exists in the real world, bringing it into the classroom and using that as your starting point for what you might do for a project. And then the other one is that same model, but then taking your results and applying it back out to some problem that exists. So you'll see these examples in the case studies. The first one is a fascinating example from Marcus Holmes in government. And he's taking a data set that exists in the real world, bringing it into the classroom, and using it as a way to make something more concrete. And he happens to be an expert in digital diplomacy, so it's kind of ready-made for this idea of connecting with what's out there. And he's going to tell you about his project using social media as a way to actually research the very ephemeral nature of diplomacy as it happens. So not something in a book or an article, but something that's happening real time. So let's hear from Marcus.
One of the interesting things about digital diplomacy is that it takes place in a space that's largely available to us here in Williamsburg, Virginia. So traditionally, if you want to study diplomacy, you either had to be in the meeting itself, you had to look at a declassified transcript, you had to talk to somebody who was there. One of the neat things about digital diplomacy is because it's taking place on Twitter, my students can go on Twitter and look at what diplomats are tweeting, look at the ways in which diplomats are engaging with themselves and each other, and look at the variation in the ways that countries use digital media. So let me give you a couple examples of how this plays out in the classroom. One of my students is looking at the ways in which China, as the state, projects itself through digital means to other countries. And her hypothesis is that if we look at Chinese embassies and the Facebook pages that they have and the Twitter accounts that they have, that the message is going to be slightly different in, say, South American countries than Asian countries. And her hypothesis is based on this theory that China has different interests in those 2 locations, so it's going to want to project a slightly different image to both places. And that's a testable hypothesis, and she can go onto the Facebook sites of these embassies and do a content analysis of what is on those pages, what are the images that they're using, what are they talking about, what are the topics, and compare them. And so I think that's really neat, and that's something that you wouldn't be able to do 10 years ago, but because all of this is available to us online, it opens up different research avenues. Another one of my students is working on a project where he's interested in diplomats fighting on the internet. So occasionally, and this goes into the area of against best practice, you will see Twitter wars or trolling take place between diplomats. So just as high school kids and college kids sometimes engage in this type of behavior, diplomats do as well, unfortunately. So he's interested in why diplomats would put themselves out there on Twitter and engage in these fights, which seem to be fairly irrational because nothing's going to come of it other than embarrassment or perhaps a very quick emotional satisfaction to put somebody down online. But what drives that for him is the interesting question. So by comparing episodes of diplomats fighting on the internet, he thinks he can be able to develop a theory about when and under what conditions they engage in this type of behavior. The other nice thing about digital diplomacy is that it can be studied experimentally. So one of the things that we do in our laboratory here at William & Mary is we have students look at web pages, i.e. Twitter pages or Facebook pages or embassy websites that have been manipulated in some way to project a particular image, and then we can see what effect that image has on decision making after you've read the website. So if the idea is that from a public diplomacy perspective, using a particular image to project a type of state that you want to convey that you're a peaceful state, or you want to convey that you have good cooperative intentions, there should be some effect of that message that's being read by people who are looking at the webpage. So we can test that. We can see whether or not people who look at a particular website, particular image, have different types of decisions that they make versus the times that they don't view those images. So one of the things we have not looked at yet is the Internet Wayback Machine, which is essentially an archive of websites. And that's a really interesting idea because we could go back and look and say, in a particular period of time where we know what the outcome is, we can see what the United States or other countries were doing online, what image they were projecting, were they trying to do something and it didn't work out well. That provides a very nice opportunity to compare what's going on in the present with what's going on in the past, and the benefit of looking at the past is that we know exactly what happens. And so we can sort of connect the dots. So I think the use of utilities and websites like the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, will be incredibly useful in the future as more and more students start to get into the digital diplomacy research.
All right. So, anything that strikes you about this approach that Marcus has taken in terms of bringing something real and in real time into the classroom? Yeah.
Well, I'm a historian, and so in listening to what people have been saying so far and watching this, I'm struck by how nice it would be to have digital diplomacy from, say, 300 years ago. That's the problem for historians, how to bring this kind of, we don't have the sources we can't make the sources come alive in a literal sense the way they are here. So it's fabulous what he's doing, and I'm jotting things down and thinking about how to translate that in my own field, but it's not so immediately obvious how you bring real world data into your classroom. But it's great. It's fabulous.
That's a very good point. Any other initial reactions? Yeah.
For me, it's taking something that is often dismissed, because I do a lot of work with popular culture and often face the, well, why would you care about that, or why does anyone care about that? But he's taking something like Twitter, which is not only this sort of real-time experience, but something that millennials use, that I don't fit into that category, but that they use, but in a very different way. And so recontextualizing it to say that it can have a powerful purpose. It's not just about hashtags, and it's not just about pictures of yourself or your cats or whatever, but making this critical thinking connection between what really can happen and broader ramifications of using something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, very good. Yeah. And I think that's pretty much, both of you kind of hit on his two main points when I asked him, when I interviewed him, why did you choose this medium as opposed to something else? He was talking about that idea that, yes, there's a kind of traditional sense of communication, articles and readings, but this is much more kind of timely and happening right now. And so it kind of relates, there's a little bit of a novelty factor there, which is not a bad thing in education. Novelty factor can kind of be used for your advantage. You saw the how and how he did it. I did ask him, what's next? Are you going to do this again? Are you going to try a second round of this? And he definitely wants to do it again, but he's actually already looking at other platforms because Twitter's not cool anymore, guys. Maybe they know they have, but now it's like Snapchat and other things. And so he wants to expand to kind of more of the pop culture aspect of social media and see if that can be used in a new and innovative way. And so he's already looking at extending this model back out into the world to see kind of what's the latest and greatest in that kind of communication. So that was Marcus Holmes from government. He'd be happy to answer any other questions. He couldn't be here today. He's not feeling well. But feel free to contact him if you have specific questions. And Bob was going to show us about.
Lori, I know it's much less sophisticated than Twitter, but correspondence. I mean, if you think of correspondence, it's been those pools of correspondence information that have been around forever, but now digitally you can have access to them fairly easily.
Yeah, there is more and more digital.
And I can't imagine any world leaders using Twitter as one of their main forms of communication. So I think that Marcus might have a tough time in the next 4 years.
Well, I'll tell you, 50 years from now, Twitter feeds are going to be very interesting material for his time.
Yes.
They will be. Let's wait for that.
Yeah,
Will
that's
be.
right.
So Our next example comes from Hispanic Studies and Modern Languages. It's a project that Paulina Corion is going to be working on translation. So she closes the loop. She takes a real world problem, need, brings it to the classroom, and then is hoping to actually produce solutions that go back out into the real world. So let me turn on.
Next spring semester, I'm going to be teaching a class on medical interpretation. Students are going to be learning about the strategies and the objectives on how to be a good interpreter. There is an internship that some students go in the Eastern Shore in the summer. So the students will be trained and prepared during this class to understand how to become a good interpreter, how could they have cultural awareness of the people who are they going to be interpreting, and understanding the reasons why communities of Hispanics are living in that area, and how to help them be the bridge between the doctor and the patient. So I developed this video with a couple of things in mind. And the first one is for them to understand how their relationship and more or less how it works between the interpreter, the patient, and the doctor. And embedded in the video are a couple of mistakes that an interpreter can make. So the students can see them in action and learn about those mistakes and understand why it is wrong what they're watching. That eventually they're going to get together and they are going to take specific mistakes that could happen during an interpretation setting and make their own videos to present to the class as their own project.
All right, so that's Paulina's explanation of the project. The real world problem is the need for medical interpretation. And so what we're going to look at next is, as she mentions, there's going to be videos are going to play a part in this. And this is an early video that they would be working with students, and the students in this portion of the class would be participating as consumers. So they're reviewing, this is one of their introductions to medical interpretation, and it's being role played by 2 faculty members. And this is the way you all are.
Buenos días,
Buenos días.
me llamo Jonathan,
Mucho gusto.
usted se llama
Jorge.
Jorge. Jorge, usted ha trabajado con el intérprete antes, sí voy a decir el intérprete, ¿usted ha trabajado?
No, nunca.
Ok, así va a funcionar. Yo voy a interpretar, yo voy a decir todo lo que usted diga cuando llegue el médico. Si usted no quiere que yo diga lo que usted dice, no lo diga. Y voy a decir todo,
¿Usted va a decir todo lo que yo diga?
todo lo que usted dice. Ok. Entonces, mejor que usted mire directamente al médico y no a mí cuando está hablando.
Ok.
Y también me ayudaría mucho si usted no hablara suelto, sino con pausas. Es muy agradecido. ¿Alguna pregunta?
Entonces, quiere que hable despacio.
Por favor.
Ok.
My name is Dr. Ooze.
I'm Jonathan, I'm the interpreter.
Oh, okay.
Have you ever worked with an interpreter before?
No.
Okay, so this is the way it will work. I'm going to interpret everything that you say. If you don't want to.
So he's going to go through the same process with the doctor. And again, this is students' first introduction to interpretation. So we're going to jump a little bit ahead here because he goes through basically the same script with the doctor, who may have not ever worked with an interpreter before. And we're going to jump to their first introductions. So they're not very linear necessarily. They introduce mistakes. And the students are, early on, they point out the mistakes. And we'll see one of those here.
Sí. Si viera cómo me duele, qué barbaridad. Yo siento, estoy que ya no puedo más con este dolor de barriga. Si más parece que ya me muero.
What did you say?
Nothing, no worries.
Does it hurt here?
Me duele aquí.
No.
How about here? My
Aquí.
Uy, sí, qué horror. Me duele durísimo ahí.
Oh, yes, it hurts very hard. Okay, I need you to lift your leg.
Me duele. No puedo levantar la pierna. Hoy me duele más que ayer. Así que fue una bellísima.
What did he say? He said it hurts more today than yesterday. I'm going to order some lab work to check your level of white cells. It may be some kind of infection.
So again, first, early video. The students are watching these as consumers. It's role playing. We don't have to deal with human subjects. Where this is going is they're going to look at some of the mistakes that are made, and then the students are going to be asked to correct these videos and produce their own videos. Okay, so that's still being all kept within the classroom, but the long-term goal is that you're now introduced students who can actually go out into the community, whether it be in Hampton Roads or in the Eastern Shore, where Jonathan Aries works, and actually provide these services to the community. So this takes it full circle. So again, the same questions. Why? Because Spanish-speaking laborers throughout the peninsula in Paulina's project need help communicating their medical needs and interpreting what their doctors are asking them to do. How is she doing it? She's having the students watch role-playing videos where these interactions are reproduced in sort of a controlled environment. And then they are asked to produce their own videos that correct these situations. And the where to next is that these students will go out into the real world and provide these services. And if you do Peruvian accent, it was just hilarious to watch George. So it's always a joy to watch that video. Does anybody have any questions or comments about how this works or applications that you might see to it?
Oh, I'll just highlight that.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Paulina this was her project in the faculty seminar last spring. She participated in a semester-long faculty seminar on universal design for learning, and that's a fun seminar that she participated in. And this was her idea that she's been developing, is a way to develop vocabulary through kind of a real-world application.
Yeah. So Apple hosted this seminar with I think about a dozen faculty members on UDL, and all of them have basically developed these into course activities. Basically. So, are we all good? Should we keep going? So, with that said, I'm going to introduce Rob Rose, who is the director of the Center for Geospatial Analysis, who seems to be limping. Are we all right?
Yeah, we fix it.
Okay. Rob is the director for the CGA right here in Swim Library. If ever you have anything geospatial, Rob is the person to come and talk to, I think.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here. As Pablo mentioned, I am the director of the Center for Geospatial Analysis, just upstairs on the second floor. Swim Library, and happy GIS Day. If you didn't know, today's International GIS Day is part of Geography Awareness Week. If you want to learn more about the CGA, we actually have an open house from 3 to 5 today. So come visit us. But the goals of the CGA, the center, we're a support unit on campus, so we provide support across the entire campus in 3 main areas. One, improving geospatial literacy. So we teach courses. We teach an introduction to geographic information systems, as well as advanced topics and a remote sensing course, as well as some short courses, a GIS boot camp, those sorts of things. We are a GIS geoscience support center, so we provide support to faculty, students, and staff on their use of geospatial data in their research and analysis. And finally, we try to communicate across campus why you should be using spatial data in your work. So because we're talking about teaching today, I'll just focus a little bit more on what we do around teaching. So this is the general outline of where we hope to be in a few years. We're not quite there yet. We want to begin with some core geoscience education, and that means adding probably a Call 100 course that introduces students to spatial data and how it's being used in a multitude of disciplines. Once they go through that, then they can take the intermediate courses, including the introduction to GIS and the introduction to remote sensing, and then some advanced topics in geosciences. And today I'm actually going to be talking specifically about this introduction to GIS course and the advanced topics course that we're running next semester, and how we use both real-world projects and real-world data in those classes. So let's start with the Intro to GIS course. Traditionally, and this class has been taught for many, many years now on many different campuses. And traditionally, it's been taught as a software-based course. We use a specific tool for GIS. It's called Esri ArcMap. And the traditional way to teach that is to say, here's ArcMap. Now let's teach you step by step how to use it. We're trying to change the approach here. So we're trying to kind of flip this approach on its head and start with the basic fundamental aspect that we want to teach students how to answer questions using spatial data. So we take teaching software out of the equation and we approach it from teaching students about answering questions. Now, they still learn the software, but that's in the context of answering these questions using spatial data. And part of what they have to do for this class is a final group project. Now, what we've done in the past and what we're still doing is done something called a habitat suitability model. And my background is conservation. I worked for 7 years for the Wildlife Conservation Society. And this was a very common problem that conservation organizations around the world tried to address. And the idea here in this example is we want to figure out the best places in Africa for eastern chimpanzees. So it's a critical approach to identifying locations that are important for conservation, but it's also important in filling in gaps in knowledge. There's a lot of places, especially in eastern Congo, where we just don't know anything about the populations of eastern chimpanzees because in part it's just hard to travel there. It's dangerous, there's a lot of rebel activity, so oftentimes conservationists ignore areas. So the idea of this project is to use data that we know about chimpanzees that drive habitat preferences. Things like temperature and rainfall, different elevations and vegetation cover, but we also include information about human threats. We know that humans are a threat to eastern chimpanzees, so we use things like distance to settlements, the human footprint or human impact at that location, and use all of these elements, all of these data in a model, and it spits out something that looks like this. And this map just shows the probability of finding these eastern chimpanzees at any location. The brighter the red, the more likely you'll find it there, based on those variables. So this is a real world problem that we're bringing into the classroom. We bring it in as a way for students to kind of go through these learning objectives. And the learning objectives including crafting a feasible research question. All the students, and they work in groups of either 3 or 4, started crafting a research question. I'm sure you would all agree it's one of the hardest things to train students on how to do. I know I still struggle with getting a good research question together. Once they have that, they then next move on to researching the species in question and identifying what factors drive habitat suitability and what the threats are. And so they learn to conduct some of that scholarly research and have to show how they use that research in their final analysis. They generate a model of the analysis. We teach this through the GIS project cycle. So there's this kind of standard project cycle that we use for GIS projects, and we have students going step by step through the project cycle and then reporting in their final presentation at each one of those steps. They certainly present at the end of the semester, so they have to build skills on presenting, and the whole group has to present. And most importantly, we want to teach them GIS analytical skills. This is a GIS class. This is about answering questions using these tools, but they need to learn that. And that's the focus. Now, in previous years, we've used real-world endangered species, things like gorillas and black bears, snow leopards, and tapirs. And in general, it's been a successful project. It does force students to kind of take everything they learned in the semester and apply it to this final project. What's been great about it, too, is they have to engage real-world data. And so they're kind of constantly looking for these real-world data sets and bringing them in for analysis, evaluating whether these data sets are meaningful. But they also end up reaching out to species experts. So we've had a number of groups go out and contact species experts based on papers that they found to ask them more questions about their work and about that species. We know it's a challenging project. We give the students a lot of time in class. Almost the last 3 weeks of the class are dedicated to this project. And mostly we meet our learning objectives. Except we noticed one issue last year. Students get so focused on this idea of, did my habitat suitability model come out right? And that's not the goal of the class. We're not expecting them to make a suitability model that's right. And so what we wanted to do is kind of take that out of the equation. And so what we're trying this year is using mythical beasts. So we're no longer using real species. We're using things like Bigfoot, the jackalope, the Jersey devil, a few others, Mothman, Wendigo, Griffin. And we assign a state to each one of the species. And so now we take this idea of getting the habitat suitability model right out of the equation. They still have to use real world data. They still have to conduct some scholarly research into each one of these species, figure out and identify what they believe are the habitat preferences as well as threats, and use that in the model in the same way we would do it for real world species. But we hope that's going to kind of address that issue of students being too concerned about whether their model is actually right. So we have the same learning objectives, all the learning objectives are the same, but it takes the focus off of having the correct results and shifts towards building the GIS skills. The other class that we're teaching next semester is this Advanced Topics in GIS. And this is a new class for us, and we're basing it on what I'm calling the Clark model for conservation education. So while I was at the Wildlife Conservation Society, we ended up partnering with some faculty at Clark University to address real-world conservation questions in the classroom. So my boss and I would think about what question we wanted to ask for the semester. We'd hand it off to the Clark students and basically set them up as consultants to the Wildlife Conservation Society. And they had a semester to analyze the question. They were typically grounded in a particular location and identify ways to answer that question, both for that location as well as other locations that the WCS had by providing methodologies to answer those questions. So this is a really valuable thing both for students and for the WCS. So from the WCS side of it, it meant that we were getting real world answers to the questions that we were struggling with and didn't have resources to address. And for the students, they were working on an actual project that affected field research and conservation. So here's an example. This is an example that was looking at using remote sensing to monitor nearshore environments. So traditionally in the past, anything off of land has been hard to monitor using satellite imagery. Typically, satellite imagery just doesn't see what's going on under the water. But with the recent launch of Landsat 8, launched in 2013, we now have some new sensors on board that satellite that supposedly are going to let us look at nearshore environments a little bit better. So what we brought to the students that semester, and this was right after Landsat 8 was launched, was can this actually work? Can we monitor nearshore environments for things like coral, seagrass, beach, and suspended sediments using this new sensor? And if the answer was yes, what are the methodologies or the best methodologies to do that? And that's what we posed to the students at Clark. Now this is really fantastic. The students really engage in this topic and they come back with maps like this that actually outline in quite a bit of detail the amount of area of each one of the land cover types. Again, they were working with field projects, so this is at one of the WCS field sites, and they were in constant contact with that team to find out first what types of information they were looking for, and also gaining access to some of the field research that they had done. So we're taking the same approach into the classroom next semester here at William & Mary. And again, we're collaborating with the Wildlife Conservation Society, and we're going to focus on a different question, accessibility to protected areas. Again, this is a question that the Wildlife Conservation Society really struggles to deal with, because they have all these areas in the field that are protected, but they need to understand how accessible they are. And from a conservation standpoint, accessibility is actually not such a good thing. It's not in the same framework as, oh, we have a national park and we want people to visit. Accessibility in a lot of the places that the WCS works means extraction of resources. And so by understanding how much accessibility there is and what drives accessibility, the WCS can then plan conservation initiatives around reducing the impact of that accessibility. So again, we're going to bring in a small subset of protected areas. We're going to hand the question over to the students, and they're going to tackle that as consultants to the WCS. We hope the seminar is, one, going to give students to improve their GIS skills. We will present some new GIS skills to them. We'll read some papers and kind of report back on some of the papers that we read. So it'll be based kind of like a seminar type class. But we are working on real world conservation challenges with the WCS. So WCS actually gave us this problem, and we know they need an answer to it. And we hope a third outcome, the students will gain a better understanding of how conservation issues are addressed around the globe. Like the Clark model, students will work closely with WCS field sites. We'll put them in touch with these field sites. And the hope is that they're going to develop methodologies that can be used by other sites. So not only will we have an answer for these sites, but we're going to have methodologies that can be taken to any other site. And the hope is eventually to develop a web-based, web-enabled application that will allow anybody to go on and access accessibility based on that location and a bunch of real-world data sets. The final step of this is then reporting back to WCS. And I know students really like this. We'll probably go up to DC and meet with WCS and report the findings back to WCS. So just in conclusion, I just want to talk a little bit about the use of real-world data in projects in the context of these two classes. First, when it comes to data, it's standard practice in the GIS world to use real-world data. We don't often collect data. We have two small projects in the GIS class, one with the GPS and one with the citizen science data collection. But in general, what we have are real-world data sets. And what that means for students is that they spend a lot of time trying to find these data sets, especially for that final project. And it's great for the students because, one, they're engaged with real-world data. They're looking for data on population density in Virginia, not just kind of making things up that they think will drive different locations. And two, they have to go through this process of assessing data that they get off of the internet. And as you probably know, there's really good data sources out there and really poor data sources out there. And so it forces the students to evaluate data that they'll use throughout their careers and identify whether this is a valuable data set or not. In terms of the projects, we certainly find it, and we found this with the Clark students, and we find this with the students working on the habitat suitability models and expect this for next semester, that students tend to be really engaged with these projects because they feel like, first, they're working on a real-world problem. This is a conservation question that people are struggling with, and they're able to find some answers for these conservation questions. So they feel like they're contributing to conservation, and that's really great for the students. Tied to that is that they feel like their work goes beyond the walls of the classroom, especially when we report back to WCS and they're engaged with field staff at WCS and saying, look, we have an answer for you. They feel like they have this meaningful contribution. They also get a sense of how conservation NGOs work. So by working with the WCS, if any of them are thinking about working for a conservation NGO, this gives them a link to those conservation organizations as well as an understanding of how they work. And finally, WCS uses these efforts and highlights the contribution that the students make back to WCS in their field program. So from all of that, it really builds the students' connection to the type of work that we're doing. Yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer questions if you have any.
Thanks, Rob. One of the things that reminded me of is also sort of the proud of ownership, right? So
Sure.
Your students who are now going to WCS and become, in effect, experts within this field, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I remember being an undergraduate and I was at the University of Maryland. We were contacted by somebody from Goddard Flight Center at NASA, and they were putting together a book, and they needed annotations for satellite imagery.
Oh, cool.
And they contacted, it was a senior class, and we got published. And so, part of what can come of these sort of exercises that you really, really get motivated and engaged.
Yep.
Our last slide here is we have some scholarly articles related to UDL or authentic assessment. We have the reference that Adam mentioned earlier from Edutopia. And then we have some campus resources. The list for campus resources could be endless. I mean, there's some that you guys might obviously think of. You guys, many of you work with swim librarians. That's one. But I wanted to highlight some of the things that have to do with sort of areas that people may not have thought of. So one is Rob with the CGA. Small Hall Makerspace. Those are guys who are dedicated to creating actual objects. The Reef Center, who works internationally with service learning. Sharp Community Scholars Program also is another engagement, the Office of Community Engagement, and another one is Aid Data that works with international aid data. So thank you for coming. It's great to have you here. As Adam mentioned before, these workshops come from your feedback directly. Please, you're going to get a survey today about this specific workshop, but also for ideas for future workshops. We don't want to sort of populate these workshops with things that we think are interesting, but rather that you think are interesting. So thank you for coming. Any other questions or?